Personally, this opportunity, IAPT, was a big joy to me because I was able to finally see my, doctor auntie, my professor, my former professor, Caroline Sharp, here for the first time after I left United States. She's now a professor of homiletics. Of course, she came from Old Testament scholarship. I welcome you all, and this session will be 2 hours. It will be divided into three time periods: 40 minutes of first presentation, and 40 minutes second presentation, and 40 minutes of interaction, like small group talk, and then like town hall meeting at the end. We are welcoming the two emerging and aspiring scholars. The first one is Dr. Zach Walsh. I'd like to introduce about him briefly. But before that, I need to change my glasses because old eyes just come in. Dr. Zach Walsh is an independent researcher and consultant who provides strategic foresight to organizations negotiating the transition to an equitable post-carbon, post-growth world. He completed his doctorate in process studies at Claremont School of Theology. He holds an MA in Buddhist Studies from Guang University, Taiwan, and a BA in East Asian Studies from Denison University. He has recently worked on the ONE project, Post-Carbon Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, Institute for Ecological Civilization, and the Courage of Care Coalition. His publications explore the intersections between social justice, eco-justice, and systems change with a focus on post-capitalism and the commons. We also introduce my colleague, Dr. Chammah Kaunda. Dr. Kaunda is a Zambian scholar currently working as an assistant professor of world Christianity and mission studies at this university, University. His current research interests focus on Pentecostalisticity, decoloniality, poetics of mysticality and materiality, and the intellectual history of African theological ideas. He draws on various theoretical approaches, including critical African theories, African philosophy and theology, colonial theology, black liberation theology, missiology, ecumenism, anthropology, political gender, and ecological theories. He has authored over 100 journal articles and book chapters. He also authored, co-authored, or edited 8 books. In 2018, he was recognized in the list of the top 10 young most published researchers under 40 at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So we will listen to Dr. Walsh's talk for the first 35 minutes or so, and then the mic will be handed over to Dr. Kaunda. Please welcome Dr. Walsh.
Different. They're cycling. Give them a minute. So, I do this one. Yes. There we go. All right. We're ready. It's lovely to be here. I'll get a good lunch. I'm Zach Walsh, so I'll be presenting, as was mentioned, for about 30 or so minutes. Okay, thank you. Great. So I'm going to provide a general sort of overview within this field of technology and environment, where some of the major topic areas and issues. Then we'll delve into more detail on the sort of theology and spirituality around that before going into a sort of group discussion with you all, sort of lines of inquiry that are engaging to you. So to start, the structure of the presentation is in 3 parts. The first is this idea of the evolution of the bio and technosphere and the coupling between the biosphere and the technosphere. The second part is the environmental limits of technological development, and then moving into the third part, I'll talk about a future of appropriate technology. So I started with a more sort of scientific perspective that's more descriptive, and moving into sort of more values-oriented, normative discussion of the issues at hand. Starting at a very high level at the beginning, I wanted to introduce these concepts of the biosphere and technosphere in terms of the evolutionary history of the planet, right? And so this is from an astrobiological perspective, actually looking not only at our planet, but all planets, both within our solar system, but even exoplanets outside the solar system. And they follow this general trajectory, and even interestingly, mathematically speaking, there are feasibly other planets, exoplanets, that have gone through not just the first few phases, but potentially even this last phase that we might term as the Anthropocene, which is a phase of technological and biological development. The first class, though, is just the sort of radiation, right, that creates an atmosphere in the second class, and then the creation of a thin biosphere in the third class. The fourth class is the development of a thicker biosphere where you have plants and larger mammals. And this last fifth class, as I mentioned, is this moment of the Anthropocene where you have a coupling between the biosphere and the technosphere. I wanted to present some images to actually evoke this sense of coupling between the biosphere and technosphere, to see the grafting almost of the human and non-human. A lot of emotions for me are evoked through these images. I'm sure it's similar for you. One of the things to note, for me at least, is this, as this grafting of human and non-human, technological and biological is present, there's the simultaneous beauty, I find, especially in the earlier images that I showed. Almost looks like an abstract painting or sort of something impressionistic, with the sense, especially in the later images, of a bit of horror or sort of like just immensity of human development on the earth. So that sort of tension is ever present in a lot of the work that I do too, and it's very spiritually driving me towards, this negotiating this sort of tension between the human and biosphere. Curious to hear your thoughts though, perhaps later in the discussion as to what this evokes for you. Now I just wanted to open up to the context of the actual historical period of the Anthropocene, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is that sort of fifth class that I presented a moment ago, where there's this coupling between the biosphere and technosphere, but from a geological perspective, it's often measured in terms of markers. And in this graph, you see the markers of production of aluminum, concrete, plastics, and synthetic fibers in this sort of exponential increase that happens at precisely around 1950. And that's the most, sort of dominant hypothesis of when the Anthropocene began, was the 1950. Also, not coincidentally, the sort of advent of the atomic bomb and other sort of earth-shattering technologies. The second dominant hypothesis, though, which also holds some weight within the geological community, is around 1800, where you have a sort of marked increase related to sort of the steam engine and the advancement of technology moving into the second, third, and fourth industrial revolution. We're currently in the sort of fourth phase of the industrial revolution that's characterized by digital technology, right? Sort of big tech. this evolutionary trajectory, there's also a very interesting role for digital media in the way that it replicates culture. We now have digital technology that is, through mass communication, relaying information at a planetary scale, right? So the sort of exponential increase we saw in the earlier graphs is also related to the exchange of information and data that's happening through the sort of fourth industrial revolution dominated by digital technology. So there is a very strong coupling, in other words, between the biosphere and technosphere that's happening precisely at this moment with the advent of digital technology and the way it interacts with biology and biotechnology and synthetic biology and all these new sort of fields, right? Also, I'm sure we're all familiar, but the largest sort of industry by assets is at the present moment big tech, right? So Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, which is Google, Facebook, they're just massive. And so also their political influence is massive. Digital revolution, which is that fourth industrial revolution, is really driving a lot of societal developments at this particular juncture in history. And these are just some of the various applications and innovations around digital technology that are happening right now, each with different time spans. But you have things like artificial intelligence, obviously, has just become really all over the media through ChatGPT, but you also have blockchain technology or Web3 technology that's happening or emerging right now. You have smart robots, you have autonomous driving vehicles. All of these things are either in development or beginning to roll out, all related to digital technology. Now, I really wanted to sort of take a pause on the second part, recognize the environmental impacts of all of this technology, because I think that's often what's missing in mainstream media as well, is the digital tech is thought of as information, it's light, it's ephemeral, there's not much impact, but to the contrary, there's a lot of environmental impact, both socially in terms of actual people, usually black and brown, who are mining the materials that go into the production of these technologies. Taking a smartphone, for example, the trend in digital technology is towards miniaturization, which is technology getting smaller and smaller, right? The idea of like a nanotech, right? Getting smaller and smaller. But in that miniaturization, there is so much embodied energy in the production of that technology. So your smartphone has 60 different materials and 30 different metals, which, if you look at the map, are globally distributed, right? In which countries are now fighting for control over specific mines for these critical raw materials that go into the production of your smartphones. It is an incredibly powerful device that many of us enjoy, and so it has many benefits, and at the same time, it has this embodied energy that is so highly concentrated and implicated in so much social and environmental injustice. So just holding the attention of those two is really important. I want to call our attention to that. And again, there are many multifaceted consequences in the production process itself, such as inhuman working conditions, deforestation, chemical pollution, transportation, power generation, electronic waste. I joined each of these images too with these sort of sustainable development goals to show you both the problems and the proposed solutions are often related to this entire life cycle process of the production of these technologies. This also presents overwhelming complexity, right, which again is often invisible or not in the awareness of most people who are using smartphones. You tend to forget the complexity that is involved in the production and transmission of this kind of tech. From an environmental perspective, there's also a worrying trend. Contrary to much popular opinion, that digital technology is quite resource intensive, and that the trend lines are going in the opposite direction is what we would like to see. So IPCC and many sustainable development experts, work on the sort of assumption of decoupling so that there is less environmental impact per unit of production. But the fact is, digital technology is actually becoming more environmentally disruptive and emitting more than less carbon into the atmosphere. This brings up a sort of current paradigm within environmental sciences and sustainable development called green growth, which is just this idea that we can continue growing the scale of the economy as long as we decouple emissions and production such that production becomes more environmentally friendly, less environmentally destructive, right? This is the sort of hypothesis that drives the mainstream community. But empirically speaking, it's not actually accurate. There isn't empirical evidence, historically speaking, that says this has been achieved. It's more like the promise, right? Through the spreading of renewables and improvements in efficiency. Sustainable development experts say that we can continue growing the scale of the economy at the time that we reduce its environmental impacts. But empirically and historically speaking, that hasn't been the case. And where you do find evidence that that is the case, it's only relative decoupling, not absolute decoupling. The difference, it's a technical difference, but it's relative is that the rate of growth is decreasing relative to the amount produced, as opposed to being inversely correlated, which is what you need for net zero scenarios in the next 20, 30 years. Having said that, even when you see evidence of relative decoupling, it's usually in advanced economies, and the reason is because they're outsourcing their environmentally destructive production. Right? So there's a huge issue with that, obviously. The last point here is technology is often sought as the solution for fixing problems. This is especially Plenary and Elizabeth Moore, right? There's this sort of techno-fetishism, this sort of techno-optimism. Put in the larger context of a growing economy of scale, the issue with technology is often it creates rebound effects, which is that, yes, technology is getting better and it's improving efficiency within the economy, but within a growing economy, the improvements in efficiency often go towards growing more. So you're not actually decreasing the environmental imprint, right? So that's what's called a rebound effect. The technology is making things efficient, but in a growing economy, that's not getting us to where we need to go. Oops, I pushed the wrong button. There we go. So, in addition to the issue of emissions, we also have issues of critical resource limits, and this just shows you really in a snapshot way across all the different resources when experts estimate we will hit the peak, which is to say the sort of midpoint between the available resources we have on the planet based on prospecting. And you can see down the list, oil, gas, coal, cadmium, gold, silver, all the things used in your smartphones and your, different technologies and day-to-day household items are hitting peak in this century. And I'd say most of if you look at sort of the trend line, it's like between 2030 and 2040 for most of them, right? So it's extremely significant also because even once we reach that midpoint, it's not to say that we don't have more in reserve, but often that those reserves are harder and harder to get, i.e. it takes more and more resources to get them. And should we even be doing it in the first place? That's obviously the larger context or question, but this is another important aspect of environmental technology. To go a little bit deeper into this, this is also something that I think is off the radar of most people, even within the sustainable development community, which I wanted to raise their attention to, which is that there is a huge gap between the demand for these critical resources and the actual ability to produce them, based on the available mines and industrial infrastructure to do that, in addition to the availability of the resources. So if you look at, for instance, the graph at the bottom, the red line is describing what we need in terms of the supply of copper, lithium, and cobalt to achieve the sustainable development goals and reach net zero by 2050, for instance. The blue is our ability to produce those. So what this is showing is that even under the assumptions of net zero and sustainable development, to hit our goals, we don't even have the capacity to produce the materials for renewable energy, the things that we would need to actually achieve those goals. Very concerning. The gap, for instance, on lithium is about 4 times, which is to say the demand is 4 times higher than our ability to produce it. Lithium is used in ion batteries that go in electric vehicles, for instance, right? So there are a lot of promises and over-promises about EVs as the solution towards, renewable energy and renewable infrastructure and everything else. But the reality in terms of critical materials that are needed to produce those is a huge gap between what we say we're going to achieve in the next 10, 20, 30 years and what we'll actually have. Having said all this, again, there's 2 sides to everything. Renewable energy is really important. We definitely need it, right? If you look at the studies, it definitely does emit less than fossil fuels. But looking at the historical evidence and empirical studies on how fast the energy transition has moved, as most of us are aware, not fast enough. So it's an interesting graph at the top because it actually shows you the projections or the sort of promises made by different agencies saying, these are the forecasts. Basically, the trend line going up is saying that's the share of renewable energy within the larger energy mix. It's going to just increase in the span of 10 years, right? 20 years. We're going to have 10%, 20%, 30% more solar. The reality has been it's been a much slower and much more gradual uptick, and so it's taken much longer than most have anticipated. The bottom graph tells a slightly different story, just as important, if not more important, I would say, which is that the cost to produce energy is increasing. It's based on an indicator called EROI, which is energy return on investment. So let me give you an example. Historically, fossil fuels, especially oil, were extremely potent, right? Oil had 100 to 1 EROI, which is to say, for every barrel of oil that you use to produce, you get 100 out of it. It's almost free. So you get 100 barrels of oil, and you take one barrel of oil to produce it. It's extremely potent. That used to be, right? Currently, EROI of oil has dropped down to 15 to 1. So it used to be 100 to 1, now it's 15 to 1. And that's again because it takes more energy to recover oil that is deeper in the earth, right? So there's this sort of cost to producing oil. We've now moved to fracking and other forms of getting oil that are more costly and destructive. That's oil. If we look at the energy return on investment of renewable energy, typically it's lower than oil. So estimates vary, but it can be between 3 to 1, which is dangerously low. Some say civilization couldn't even survive on 3 to 1, up to 15 to 1. And it depends on the type of renewable technology. So we have wind, it's higher than solar, you can sort of compare. But either way you slice it, on the higher end of the projections, if it's 15 to 1, which is comparable to oil right now, historically speaking, that's still historically a lower return on energy investment. So we have to, the general idea is, think about simplifying society because we have less energy available than we have historically. So if we're getting less return on our investment through renewables, we have less energy available, we have to simplify society, as opposed to in the past we've always complexified society because we have more and more energy available, right? We have to use less. This shows you what I just said historically, that over the course of human evolution and human society, there's greater and greater availability of energy, forms of more embodied energy. So first we took energy from the environment, then we took energy from agriculture, then we took energy from industry, people, and then information. And as you go along this historical trajectory, energy becomes more and more embodied, more and more concentrated. what happens also is we have more energy available to us. That's why it's becoming more embodied. Society becomes more complex and larger in scale. If we have less available energy, then there can be a contraction, right? Society cannot continue to complexify, to grow larger, because there's less available energy. That's the implication behind this. Here, I just wanted to show also what are the actual dominant strategies that are being used by the sustainable development community, and they tend not to be, unfortunately, nature-based solutions always, like plant more trees and develop better soil, but more and more moving into carbon capture, sucking out and then burying. And that's a very technological approach to the solution, but in the long run, very short-sighted. What it does do, though, is that by promising to capture carbon out of the atmosphere and bury it, you can sort of play this dangerous game of saying, we don't, have to have societal changes now, because in the future, using these technologies, we will solve the problem by sucking, carbon out of the atmosphere and burying it in the soil. It's sort of a trick. And it's in the models themselves, is that the sustainable development scenarios assume in the future that we will be able to do this, which is highly speculative and highly risky. First, because we don't have these technologies at the scale that we would need, right? So we're sort of betting on that without the evidence to support it. And building that into the models to say that we don't have to make the dramatic cuts today because tomorrow, right, next year, the year after, we will have the technology to solve the problem. The last couple slides in this section, I just wanted to again bring into the larger context of anthropogenic risk, which is man-made risk. The Anthropocene is a very novel and unique period in history because it coincides with this exponential increase in risk created by technology. Again, the advent of the nuclear bomb was sort of the beginning of this idea, but it continues to this day with the advent of artificial intelligence, weapons of mass destruction, biotech and bioweapons, nanotech, techno-totalitarianism, right? Like, in the last 50 years, we have developed this capacity through technology to really introduce existential risk at the global planetary scale. And the final sort of footnote on that is that if you ever read, they're called like long-termists, for instance. It's like a community of technologists that is interested in the long-term future. Their sort of assumption is that technology creates problems, and to solve those, we need to continue investing in technology. That idea can introduce what I would say is like a doom loop, because through the exponential advancement of this technology, beyond our capacity to even understand, manage, or regulate it, you're introducing more and more risk to a situation and then investing in the technology to solve essentially the problem that you're creating. So that is also very dangerous. Okay, part 3. Turning towards a bit more of a normative, okay, so what do we do, right? Yeah, exactly. I'm getting stressed too. And, these are just some ideas. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I'm using this concept of appropriate technology, right? Technology is not per se the enemy. It's more like our relationship to technology. What is technology doing? It's complex, as everything is. And then putting that in the context of the future. So what future do we want? What future is possible, right? And these are just some archetypes. There are others, but very prominent archetypes. One is evolutionary progress, right? Often wrapped around the myth of progress. Another is collapse, which you see a lot of. Retro future, so sort of going back, right? Like make America great again. And then Gaia. This sort of beautiful entanglement of the human and non-human in a sustainable future is something that I would love to see. Despite this multiplicity of alternative futures, the mainstream media typically portrays the sort of collapse scenarios, and it makes like great Hollywood movies. I mean, I love watching Mad Max and Snowpiercer too, but it really deprives human culture of the alternatives, right? It really, in a lot of ways, allows the status quo to continue because it doesn't provide imagination, it doesn't provide alternative scenarios within a culture. And then the last point on this I wanted to make is that there's this really interesting relationship too between people's ideas about the future and energy and technology. So here's just some examples, right? Like we've all heard of some of these. Steampunk is the idea of the future based on steam energy. Atom punk was based on the idea of the atomic, nuclear energy. Cyberpunk is a sort of like dystopian internet age where like large corporations are ruling the world. But these are all sort of defined by our relationship to energy and technology. And then I would offer an alternative, which is this small sort of niche within, especially internet culture, called solar punk. But it's this idea of a positive future that is intrinsically just, both socially and environmentally. And this is, again, a burgeoning sort of aesthetic movement of people interested in everything from design and fashion, but often also literature and sci-fi. And they're creating stories, they're creating art, they're creating culture based on a positive, sustainable vision of the future. And here's just some examples of some of the literature, like Ursula Le Guin is often noted as early sort of version of solar punk. Also, Kim Stanley Robinson is noted as a solar punk sort of author. Ecotopia, you may have seen or heard, is in this genre, right? So these are like positive visions that hopefully are also realistic. Now, maybe this is just my bias, but if you look at the solar punk images on the internet, you'll find like a wide variety. And what I wanted to show that it's interesting if you look at them, because in the first case, right, personally, that image is not necessarily the future that I want to live on, because that's a vision of a civilization that still relies on fossil fuels, insofar as it has these glass, steel, silicon-based like architecture infrastructure, right? And I don't even know that the artists per se understand the assumptions behind the image. But I would love to see more art like at the bottom, where you have this beautiful, thriving, more decentralized, and more humane and just vision, right? So there's multiple versions even within the solar punk community, but which define how we live in relationship to each other in the natural world. And examples abound all around us. This is not just speculative, right? Like Mary Elizabeth Moore said this earlier, it's present in our indigenous wisdom traditions. It's present all around us in the way we communicate with each other and with the natural world. And this book I just was going to use as an example is a beautiful representation of that. And I love the title because it says low tech, right? It's sort of play on words, but tech here means traditional ecological knowledge. It's an acronym. So they're sort of subverting the idea of technology and saying that, some technology is ancient and some technology is in the right relationship with the natural world. It's not all high tech. So it's really, the underlying point here is that technology can also be in a relationship symbiotically with nature. And these are some beautiful examples of that as well, like a bridge that's made out of roots, which humans have co-constructed in India. Right? Forms of irrigation and agriculture that are in right relationship. Straw. And then I also just wanted to mention that, I'm not suggesting that we all go back to the land in precisely this way, that these examples exist also in many other movements. So eco-village movements, we've probably often heard of, but also transition town movements, which are often more urban than rural, that are basically embodying these ecological principles within the design of social structures, right? So this is more the vision of the future that I would point to as an example of appropriate technology. Related to this is how we organize society, and mutualism and cosmolocalism. That's a big word, but it's similar to the idea of globalism, or balancing the global and local, and it's specifically used in this context to describe how, for instance, IP, so intellectual property rights, if it were operating on a commons basis, so we shared information, right, it wasn't all private property, then we could actually relocalize production. And even use, in some cases, high-tech like automation technology, but in ways that's sustainable. That's just an example. And so they use this term cosmolocalism to actually describe the relocalization of production and manufacturing so that it's closer to home. But because we've been sharing information, design, plans, schematics, just all the technical know-how we would need to know how to produce something at a local scale. And that's eminently feasible. But again, it requires different social relationships based on the commons, right? And right here, I'm saying that commons, as an economic structure, can actually decrease material and energy throughput by 80%. That's a huge number if you think at a global scale. Like, it could make a huge difference. And then lastly, there's so much more that could be said, but in terms of cultural narrative and worldview work, this idea of a multi-species commons, I think, is particularly interesting. And there's so much work in the post-humanities and the, multi-species studies, and post-naturalism, these other areas of environmental humanities that are working to connect these different threads to a more care-based culture, bringing us into the future. And we'll get into this discussion later, and I'm happy for you all to talk about whatever resonates, but I just have a few questions here that you can consider bringing into the dialogue, which is just what to you would a sustainable biotech atmosphere look, feel, and be like, and what role does appropriate technology play? And finally, connecting to spiritual beliefs, values, and practices, what would support that future? Thank you.
Good afternoon. That was quite interesting and very enriching. I sat there and then I was wondering how many things that were just passing over my head. And then I said, Zach is such a brilliant. I tell you how much it's an honor to me to talk to you. I'm so grateful to Heidi and the encouragement that she has given throughout this process, and the zombies that are around to try and give me some courage as I join this afternoon. So I'm so grateful for that too. So before I move on, I just want to focus on the very title itself. My main conception of reality is based on the word from into that. I think from has been a part of my thinking and conceiving what it means as a theory, rather than just as a simple tool of thinking that somebody is from somewhere, but as a way of thinking about the world, that all the human beings and everything is from somewhere. So it's a kind of positionality, a way of thinking about Africa as part of the global system, a part of the entire world, and the way things are being imagined today, the way things are being thought about in our world today. So I take it as a space of enunciation, a space of making knowledge. So that's why the concept of from is very important into that title of mine. So let me begin by making a quotation from Tristan Harris, and he argues, and I quote from here, "More than ever before, we need the wisdom to match the power of our godlike technology. Yet technology is both eroding our ability to make sense of the world and increasing complexity of the issues we are facing today. there is an ever-growing gap between human sense-making and the issues that we are facing today, and Harris classified that as the wisdom gap. To respond to the wisdom gap question that is raised, I have argued that technology has become a fundamental practical theological category. It is not only a powerful, autonomously, as we have heard from Zach, autonomously adapting system, but also a new structure of contemporary existence. And I think all of us, we can agree with me that there is no way of thinking of the world today without thinking it through the technology, as it were. So technology shapes how we live, how we think about things that we value, religion, spirituality, other human beings, even the neighbor next to you, and fundamentally the world and technology itself. So we are being shaped and reshaped and remodeled almost into a completely new form of existence in our world today. Technology, and I quote this from Martin Heidegger, both reveals that our world is exposing the realities that are hidden in this world, but it's doing much more. It's in fact revealing the human condition itself. It's revealing us to ourselves so that we can probably begin to understand ourselves a little bit more. So today there is no question of technology that is not also a question of the politics of power, the politics of marginalization, the politics of militarization, the politics of nuclearization, and Heidi has also included one, the politics of zombification that is taking place in our world, and also sexualization of bodies and gazes, the way we look into the world. All mindsets are being reframed by technology. There is also transhumanization. I think Zach has just talked about multi-species imagining of our world. So there is this form of transhumanization and new forms of objectification of the reality today. So I'm arguing that post-anthropologizing the question of technology is imperative from my side for two reasons. And these are, first, for constructing a practical incarnation, and I think that's a very important concept in there. The practical incarnation wisdom embedded in pre-existential capacity to embrace and appreciate human blessings, the concept of blessings being part of this reality, and moral responsibility to act rightly in the world as participating in the divine nature or in the divine wisdom. Secondly, for thinking a just existence of inclusive and interconnections of inclusive differences in the unfolding and indwelling cosmic life. So my goal is much simple. I'm not here necessarily to contest any particular view of reality. I'm not doing that, or knowledge or wisdom. Rather, to draw some insights from Ubuntu eco-relationality and the incarnation of praxis, which is a Christian idea, both which are grounded in pro-existential moral weight of maintaining intricate balance of a seemingly opposites. I think that's the foundation of my argument, the maintaining intricate balance of the seemingly opposites. The idea of the intricate balance of multiplicity of natures intention is critical because it offers both a radical and functional framework of comprehensive perception of reality as a relational praxis of encountering and relating with the living entity, which I describe here as environmentity. And I'm coming back from a very African worldview, where the environment is not just a thing, it's an entity by itself in that order. So the environmentity in this order is grounded in Ubuntu sensibilities, empathy, and hospitable recognition and appreciation of inclusive differences of all things as dynamic manifestation of one and the same life principle. And I'll be explaining a little bit more on that one. I'm arguing that the true nature framework of Christ in the incarnation, engaged from Ubuntu worldview or wisdom, reveals the incarnate Christ as the embodiment of creation's capacity to maintain radical solidarity in equilibrium. I'm not looking at this concept from a dogmatic perspective. I'm not also looking at it from a metaphysics understanding of it. I'm looking at it from a pragmatic, practical understanding of incarnation as a framework of reality, of engaging the world in that sense. That's what I'm doing. So for me to do that, I distinguish Ubuntu wisdom from the ultimate life wisdom. And I think Elizabeth Moore told us about the definition that she gave this morning. But I do a little bit of distinction here from Ubuntu, from the ultimate life wisdom, as that which is intrinsic in creation, from which all human ideas of wisdom arise. And I think this is what Elizabeth was talking about this morning when she talks about ants and trees, the wisdom that is inherent, embedded within the systems that we all tap into to try and figure out ourselves in this world. So human ideas of wisdom are limited by their concern with interpreting or making sense of possible and tangible approaches to life realistically, often in humanly intelligible ways. I will demonstrate to you that Ubuntu wisdom, and I'm not taking this as the only way, because I believe that while the concept is so very much African, and I'm coming out from the entire continent by the way, excuse me, I'm coming from the southern part of Africa where the concept in fact originates from southern central part of Africa. That's where I'm coming from when I'm talking about this concept. And I don't mean claim that it's perfect, but it embodies something that actually resonates with the incarnation, and that's what I'm trying to talk about. So I'll demonstrate that Ubuntu wisdom resists anthropological conception of technology as a second nature of humanity. The concept that has gone through many people understanding. Nature today called technology is the second human nature. That is part of what I'm doing as a critique in what I'm doing here. So I respond to that with two questions which I formulate as following. How do we begin to see and think? And I want you to focus on this concept of seeing, because it's a very imperative in Ubuntu worldview. Seeing, more than just thinking about things, but I want to bring the two of them together. How do we begin to see and think about the environment and technology in ways that take seriously the search for holding in dynamic tension various natures? And there are more to that. The second question, how can the wisdom of Christ's two natures, according to this way of thinking, and Ubuntu multi-nature's rationality help us to formulate a comprehensive and radical empathic life wisdom needed for the world today? And in order for me to do that, I engage contemporary interpretations of technology as embedded in the concept of fetish. Fetish is very important in terms of my coming here. And this concept, I'm borrowing it from Sigurd Bergman in terms of my interpretation of technology. So embedded in fetish rather than in animistic worldview. So I'll explain what I mean by animism, because I'm not coming from Charles Taylor's conception of a concept. I'm coming from a different framework of thinking about that as well. So there I go. The idea of fetishized technology, I'm quoting from Nigerian scholar Chammah from here. The idea of fetishized technology, incredible. Inscribe that which cannot be believed, that which is too improbable, astonishing, and extraordinary to be believed. The incredible is not simply a breach, but an outlandish infraction of normality and its limits. It is this destabilization that technology has brought into the world, almost bringing it into disorder, disarranging the systems and everything else. And technology, incredible in my understanding of it, relates to fetishization of technology as human's breath. I want you to keep that way, because I'm quoting from Bergman as well, again from here. Human's breath, that has become a living soul. And our fetish imagination, after replacing animism, has turned into a crucial essential driving force of modern capitalism that Zeke was talking about. The human breath into systems and into realities. So fetishized technology has broken all the known rules of reality, creating its own rules and norms, and constantly threatening to become the determining norm of our world, and an ultimate standard which is rapidly consolidating hierarchies of power, hierarchies of gender, the things that the contemporary world has so much viciously fought against. Technology seems to be taking us somehow backwards, even reinforcing these systems again. The class, and becoming, and to a large extent, is feeding and contagion upon the ongoing ecological crisis and human reluctance to adequately embed itself in creation. I have argued that way because the current technological takeover has been engendered by what Charles Taylor describes as the great disembedding of human from the environment. This complete disembedding that has taken place over the last almost 500 years in human history. A situation in which the environment was rapidly objectified, instrumentalized, and reduced into a product of reason rather than an autonomous entity or a living divine breath. What am I trying to say? The fetishized technology functions as an instrument for the power of the one over other human beings and creation, in which everything, and I mean everything, trees, lands, and whatever you can think about, is nothing but means to an end. To an extent that even things that were at some point seen as not important have become means to an end. Human beings are being zombified as we age. Things are being reduced into nothing in terms of becoming product, the breath of human into those things. So fetch technology turns the given nature, okay, a quotation from Bergman again, it turns the given nature into a lifeless world where only the useful is animated. The breath of a human goes on into what it can exploit in that sense. It is through fetch technological framework that most people today, in fact, think about the world. Fetch technology constitutes the new conceptual structure of our reality, the objective condition of everyday life in its various forms. You can see this, that young people today, they would sit side by side, but they can only communicate through technology. How technology seems to be building relationship, but destabilizing them at the same time, disorienting them at the same time, even making them messy and destroying them in the very process of doing that as well. So however, fetish technology as a relational structure not only reproduces and perpetuates anthropocentrisms, but also constructs various views of the future. And we have heard, I think, a lot of this in our conference. Futures like technophobia, the fear of technology itself, techno-apocalyptic anxiety, technomessianic hope, the very feeling that actually it's technology and its advancement that is going to liberate us in our world, as it were. So what I'm saying is, today, to think of the interconnection of anthropocentrism, fetishism, and technocentrism is simultaneously thinking in the context of techno-anthropocene. The last 50 years that he has talked about and the changes that has taken place in our world has happened coincided with technology itself. So the action of the human beings in this planet is not so much actually they are freed from technology itself. They are connected. That's why I call it techno-anthropocene in that way. So the disruptive character of technology outspaces and eclipses human ability to see, much less to recognize, the devastating wounds brutally and mercilessly inflicted and being inflicted on the environment itself. Techno-anthropocene is a trauma and I mean it, is a trauma in our planet. Those who went to DMZ, you can see the wounds within the planet. Hatred, human hatred, how it creates wounds and scars in our system. So many of you went there, you thought you were just attending, but you were actually experiencing the wounds that have taken place in Korea over 50 years from now. But they are still there. That's what has been happening in our contemporary. So it is a wound. The traumatic suffering of the earth for many is not merely lie in the violent impact of the techno-anthropocene, but in the fact that such traumatic wounds are not fully acknowledged. That's a challenge. They are not fully acknowledged. We saw what was happening during the Trump's president to just reject the trauma, let alone grasp it, despite the planet's ongoing groanings of excruciating pain. So fetch technology appears as both a blessing and a curse. Despite unimaginable benefits, it is becoming more and more evident that the underlying ideology of technology today, even AI, hides an anthropocentric condition in it. It hides it within itself. A primal desire for domination and dispossession, which now contributes to global injustice and climate crisis that we're experiencing today. What are we learning from this conference? Technology is never neutral. It is political. And so far, I think to my experience, it reflects anthropocentric ideals of the rich and the powerful. I am not trying to undermine the profound impact of technology, not only on our present reality, but also on the future evolution of the world and the environment and all life forms. However, if to survive contemporary ecological crisis means to work out new ways of experiencing and interacting with the planet, then I'm suggesting this. Alternative models of seeing, first and foremost, before we even think, seeing. Because we have been constructed in a way that we begin by thinking before we see. But seeing the world, seeing reality, and then think about what the implication of what you are saying. Seeing, experiencing, and understanding technology in the more than human frameworks are not only needed today, but urgently and desperately required. There has never been a time in human history like ours when the ecological awareness forced humanity to recover and reconstitute a deep appreciation of the fundamental limits of humanity. We are limited. We can actually be wiped out. And I think people are acknowledging that today. The fundamental limits of all knowledge that we have as human beings, and the limits of the environment itself, that it can end. It's not perpetually and eternal. It can end. This is the time where we are at the moment. So this takes me to Ubuntu. And I want you to put your eyes on the diagram because it's so complicated what I'm trying to say there. Many of you have heard of the concept of Ubuntu everywhere, but you have never dived into the linguistic aspect of it. So I'm trying to do just a quick and brief linguistic before I move on to say what I want to say, and then I'll conclude. So, as argued about the nature of contemporary technology, at least in Ubuntu, Ubuntu itself is a compound word. You have heard of the idea of Abantu. So, there are always this division: Abantu, Abantu, Ifi, Ntu, Ubu, Ntu, Apa, Ntu. So Ntu, they are all compound words that are used, especially in the cultures of the Central and Southern Africa. So they are always using Ntu, Ntu, Apa, Ntu, Aba, Ntu, and all this. So Ntu is always the stem of all the words. So which means when I say Ba, without Ntu, it doesn't make sense. Ubu only makes sense when I say Ntu, Ubuntu. Aba, Ntu. Without putting Ntu, it cannot mean human beings. It's just Aba and meaningless. only Aba Ntu, then it becomes human beings. Ifi Ntu, then it becomes something else. Without Ntu in it, doesn't have meaning at all. It's just a word without any meaning. So that is important, and that if you go in many Central, Southern African people, all the concepts are surrounded by Ntu. Ntu is the fundamental structure of existence. And all these elements actually are only meaningful when you say Ku Ntu, Mu Ntu. So the Mu, these are singular. Around I put only singular aspects of them. Mu Ntu means a person. Ntu means elegant, can mean many things. I can say you are beautiful. It has to be connected. King Ntu, God and many modalities, they will still fall into that kind of thinking into that. And the fifth aspect is Umu Ntu. You can imagine I have not put it there. Because Umu Ntu is fundamental in all Ku, Mu, Ha, Ku. They cannot function without it. It's a functional aspect of all of these that qualifies them two into this structure. So let me tell you what I'm trying to say. So the foundation of Ubuntu, wisdom, is deep seeing into something, perceiving something, all things, as pervasive, animated with an intrinsic, ultimate, and overriding principle, Ntu. Ntu overrides everything that you are talking about. So when, for instance, when I use the word Umuntu, that is singular of people, plural is Abantu. Abantu, that means the living, the dead, and the yet to be born. You can see the complexity that comes to that. So the living, the dead, and the yet to be born, they are all qualified with Umu or Abantu. They become qualified by that. I'm not going to go into all of other aspects, but I can give another Kuntu, which is on the up there. Kuntu. Kuntu means fantasy, fiction, modality, creativity. It means technology. It means wisdom. It means imagination. It means beauty. It means laughter, words, rhythms of life. All of them. They come just into one conception of that thing. So keep the diagram in your mind as I move. So the two principle is the determinative stem of categorical natures and the ultimate thread of life. Ntu is a complex living system. In fact, you can argue that the only thing that is alive is the Ntu. All of us are only alive because the Ntu is fundamentally alive. Everything. Therefore, words that I speak are alive in African worldview. When a person speaks, that's why you hear of curses. Because a person can speak words and kill another person. Because words, once spoken, they become alive by themselves in that worldview as well. So what I'm saying is that Ntu is a system, is a complex living system which includes various manifestations of non-physical nature. So the non-physical nature that would include the divinities, the natural spirits. In Africa, most of the spirits are considered natural spirits because they inhabit trees, they are in the waters, they are in the things that are visible and material in that sense. So those are all qualified into the non-physical nature. And then there is biophysical. The biophysical are living human beings, forests, trees, animals, mountains, name it, and all of those other aspects. But there is a third category, which is the artificial. So the artificial, you move to this, arises in when human beings and all other creation participate in the divine creativity. Simple. In the African worldview, where I'm coming from, the creativity is an element in everything. It's not just in human beings. It's a foundation of the world. It drives the reality. Human beings and everything participate into this creativity that is present in the world itself. So creativity is intrinsic in the world. So in a Ubuntu worldview, technology is not a second nature of human beings. No. It is rather a manifestation of a distinctive nature in creation. And in fact, It is always open if you are in Africa. There are new things that are yet to manifest in the world, because the world is a complex, mysterious reality that is always unfolding, that is becoming, that is evolving into itself in that way. So this way of deep seeing, I'm not saying thinking, deep seeing reality parts radically from Edward Taylor's animism, completely from him. Taylor's animism invokes the idea of a soul or spirit, which many scholars are taken for granted as foundation to animistic thought. Taylor's animistic thinking, as many of us have come to know, emerged out of Enlightenment heritage, but also out of a violent history of Atlantic slave trade and colonization and conquest. So even his idea of animism was part of this conquering knowledge of a people who were seen as different. So it is an ontology of violence, an ontology of chain of being, if you go into Aristotelian conception of things. So in African philosophy, life, the two principles that I was showing you, is conceived as made up of indivisible, inclusive, different stuff. It is not just one thing. It is spiritual, it is physical, and non-physical spiritual at the same time. That's what it is. Forms as words and thoughts are in fact seen as part of that system. Hence, African animism, or if you put it, is fundamentally a lifeism. In fact, in the African worldview, there is even a doubt that human beings actually possess thoughts. Many of them, they'll tell you that people are possessed by thoughts, because they'll tell you these thoughts are inherited over time. What you are seeing manifesting today as technology is something that has evolved with so many people. There are thoughts that have been passed on through generations since the creation of the world in that way. So thoughts possess human beings, as it were. You don't have to agree with them. Therefore, the prefix, ubu, coming back to it. The prefix, ubu, refers to this pre-existential capacity in all other modalities of life to unconditionally create life-giving conditions for all things to effectively participate in harmonizing, balancing, reconciling, and flourishing of two natures in the world. That's why when many people, when they hear there's COVID-19, and everybody in my part of the world said there is imbalance in the system. Something has gone wrong. Someone has tampered with the system. Because the system has to be kept in balance. The relationship with human beings and animals, for them to actually be balanced. All those you see around modalities have to actually function together to maintain them too into its place in that kind of thinking. So therefore, Ubuntu is a primordial care capacity in all things, in everything, to unconditionally create these conditions for people to become, for the world to manifest. This leads me now to the question, how can we articulate a life wisdom needed for the world of multiplicity, of singular life indifference? I think that's a question we've been waiting for. What is this young man trying to talk about? So let me take you where you want me to take you, so that you can relax. Don't take all the time. And Heidi says, Chammah, you have more time. Go on. So how can we do that? So I'm going to be talking about radical empathic life wisdom. So this now is a synthesis of the incarnation, pragmatic incarnation, not metaphysics, remember, not ontological incarnation, but incarnation as a framework that is already present in the world, that is historically manifested at one time, but it's fundamentally to manifest what is already there in the system, to show how the system, if it's functioning with this balance, can actually become meaningful and balanced. So that's why I'm coming with the incarnation, not necessarily from a very traditional aspect understanding of it. So, Heidegger, the emergence of disruptive technologies as reordered reality and contemporary search for knowledge is no longer about the possibility
capability of mastery over the universe, or privileging humanity as a determining principle in creation. Knowledge today is about grasping, transfiguring, and finding wise ways to embed humanity back in creation. Humanity is disembedded, and the system is in disarray. We have to find a way of re-embedding humanity back where it belongs. The humanity that has disrupted the system. So we have to find a way of putting it back. So the co-constitutive nature of creation has always already created, requires reconstruction of a comprehensive and radical empathic lived wisdoms embedded and embodied in creation as politics of mutual recognition and solidarity of the more than human multiplicity of interconnected natures. This wisdom is not merely about perception, but the capacity for comprehensive and radical empathic kith and kin, relational perception. How do we see the bird when it's singing? Anthropologists were shocked when they found many Africans would say that that bird is singing there is my brother. Because that's a worldview. How do we see the world in a way that gives life to it? I think Elizabeth made a little bit more talked about that. Seeing a world different. Seeing it as a reality. Changing the language. Because if we don't change the language, we cannot change the way we live in the world. Remember, to be human is to have a language that defines our understanding and our being and becoming in the world. Without a language that defines, we follow the old language, then we end up locked into the systems where we find ourselves in. So, this wisdom is not merely about perception, and I've said that, but capacity for comprehensive and radical empathic and keen perception of all things as living systems, which imposes an inescapable responsibility of full-blooded shouldering the burden of life for transforming everyday human action in the world. So this means, first and foremost, for us to confront technology, we have to restore and reconstitute the human capacity to comprehensively perceive the world as a living system, as one system, not as many pieces that are floating. Others, like human beings, like they are aliens that are here for a while, and afterward they are going to go excavate the earth, go to Mars and what, but becoming at home in this world. Because we don't have a planet B in our world. And if that happens, only a few, probably the rich ones, will be flying off and the rest of us will be doomed. So we have to be So the ordinary practices of seeking balance, of deep seeing into realities beyond the visible, keep promises to ourselves through frameworks of everyday, and I'm quoting just the concept from Catherine Kahler, intercarnations, which she also called panicarnation, these relationships that are intercarnating around themselves, I think are very important in times such as ours. So, coming from there, if we engage class two natures, from Ubuntu and mystic framework, which is the comprehensive and radical empathic recognition and solidarity, we can appreciate one thing, that incarnation was a revelation of how creation is primed to maintain solidarity and equilibrium. It is primed. I think God is not revealing anything mysterious about Jesus Christ. God is showing us, showcasing what the world is and how it can maintain itself in balance. It's bringing us back to ourselves, rethinking ourselves. And I think that's why the confession of Kaunda was important here. That we have to all these multiple natures in tension without confusion. That was a confession. Without division, without separation. And the differences are not in fact negated in this process, but they are respected. So we have the differences here, the humanity, the environmentality, the artificiality, and the divinity, forming this holistic system which we call cosmic Christ in the language of today. So this approach to relationality is crucial framework for recapturing and reconstituting a practical incarnation incarnation, not only as a mode of radical empathy and keen understanding of the world, but a radical way of being and becoming in the world. So the incarnation for me, it becomes this relational site of entanglement and recognition of multiplicity of different ways and models of being in the world. The incarnation is another way of unveiling the primordial, intrinsic, and mystic, life-giving, agape way of seeing the world as a reality that is living by itself. Let me come to the conclusion of my thoughts, because I think I've talked too much so that people don't sleep. So if we put Ubuntu and the incarnation together, we can discover something into my conclusion here. If humanity is understood through the orientation to other subjects as subjects and not objects or instruments, even technology, then the way we think about the world and technology should always take a point of departure marked by recognizing that creation is not reducible to its physicality. I'm hugging here, and you can go against me, but still hold on to it. Something infinitely, quantumly, irreducible is intrinsic to creation. There's something to creation than we can study. Something more, even when we study. Something exceeds itself in creation. No matter how much we study it, there will always be excess to creation itself. Hence, incarnation interpreted from Ubuntu appears to suggest that physicality is primordially animated, inventive, timeless space. Matter itself, or the physicality, is always already spiritual from the beginning. It's always already spiritual. And the spiritual is always already mattering and technologizing itself. God is poetically eco-techno-embodied. And I'm saying that with respect. Not through historical incarnations alone, but also through creative praxis of solidarity, intentional relationality, and unconditional agape indwelling of all things, including human thoughts, human words, let alone complex things like technology and AI. Our words are animated by God, and the way we use them, they can give life or take it away. If everything, including God, is God's breath, everything, including God, is but God's breath, then fetishism is humans' bad breath in the world. Probably need to go and brush it out. Ubuntu, therefore, start with a personal covenant of moral responsibility to all things, not because it is an obligation, and I'm quoting from Immanuel Kant here, not because it's an obligation or fear of climate change. We should not act in the right way because we are scared, we are worried of climate change. But acting that way is our condition as human beings. To act right in the world is our condition. It's who we are. We just need to reclaim who we are. That's all I think that the world is telling us. We have forgotten ourselves. Reclaim who you are. Who we are is to act rightly when I see a person. That's my condition. To act wrongly when I see a person, that's not the human condition. It's something else. So every individual is morally responsible for protection of the dignity, not only of fellow human beings, but of creation, the ants and the trees. We are responsible for the world. So I conclude with Ubuntu understanding of that. It is a simple, small thing. My being and becoming is intricately, inseparably bound with your being and becoming. Everything is radically bound up in everything. It's a way we see. If we can't see, we cannot see it. when you begin to see, you will see that even the dirtiest person that you meet in the street, you are radically bound up even in their poverty, even their struggles. I have told my students several times, when you visit where people are suffering, you don't come back out rich. You always move away with their poverty. It remains as scars in your mind. When you see the trees are being cut and you watch, you participate in the destruction of that world. There is a way that we are bound together in the two systems of this world. For we can only survive and flourish together. Thank you.